And we'll begin by recognizing the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me observe that, there have been all kinds of complaints about leaking transcripts and things like that. One of the reasons we are here today is because there has been a flood of leaks out of the Justice Department about what is going on. It's barely a day goes by when you can't pick up the newspaper and find out that it's rumored this and rumored that. And then we have a witness from the FBI that comes up here and says, oh, no, we can't talk about that here to the Congress, which has constitutional oversight responsibility because it's against our rules. Well, I hope there'd be a few prosecutions of people out of justice that have been leaking this stuff to the various news media. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Strzok, a couple questions about that. The original May 2nd draft of the statement that Director Comey was making, he characterized Mrs. Clinton's actions as grossly negligent. Is that correct?
That's my recollection, yes.
Yes. Are you aware that gross negligence was changed to extremely careless in the eventual statement?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you recall at the June 6, 2016 meeting attended by you and Mr. Rybicki, Ms. Moyer, Mr. Maffa, and Lisa Page to discuss the language of the statute on whether to use grossly negligent or something else in the draft statement? What was discussed at that meeting?
So, sir, I don't remember that specific meeting. There are a variety of meetings with a bunch of people that included discussion of this concern.
Okay. Did the alternative phrase extremely careless come up at the meeting?
It did at some point, sir. I don't know if it was during that meeting or at another one. I don't remember that.
Whenever it happened, who brought it up?
My recollection, sir, is that somebody within our Office of General Counsel did. It was one of the attorneys. I don't remember which one.
You don't remember who did?
No, it was a legal issue that one of the attorneys brought up.
Okay. Now, immediately after that meeting, metadata shows that you modified the draft statement on June 6th. Is this when the phrase grossly negligent was changed to extremely careless?
Sir, again, I don't recall specifically when it happened. I am aware as well of that metadata. My recollection is of working on the draft with a group of us in my office, because it was the largest office, and taking the inputs of probably 5 different people. And it was made there.
Was it your computer that put the change into the statement?
Based on my subsequent review of that metadata, I believe that to be true.
Okay, and who has access to your computer? Anybody beside you?
No, I do. My secretary had access to elements of it, but...
And why was the change made? You know, you were in the meeting where it was agreed that the change would be made. Why was that?
My recollection, sir, again, was, and I'm not an attorney, my recollection was that attorneys within the FBI had raised the concern that the use of gross negligence triggered a very specific legal meaning. In a legal context...
Yeah, criminal.
In the legal...
Criminal.
That's exactly right. In a legal context, grossly negligent is used in various statutes to, particularly one of the mishandling statutes in 793, to talk about a criminal element of the criminal offense.
Okay.
And so, sir, if I may quickly, and I promise I'll
well,
take
so
time.
let me say this change was Hillary's get-out-of-jail-free card, right?
Absolutely not, sir.
Well,
not in any way.
Hillary hasn't been prosecuted, so if she wasn't grossly negligent but was extremely careless, you know, then there's no criminal standard involved. With grossly negligent, there is.
Sir, I think there are a lot of things I would disagree with in that assertion. First is she received no get-out-of-jail-free card. We pursued the facts.
Well, she did get a get-out-of-the-White House free card when the voters cast their votes.
Sir, I've heard that said a lot, and I can tell you there's nothing further from the truth.
Oh,
there was an effort
Trump won. That's the truth.
So, sir, what I would tell you with regard to that decision, there was concern within the perspective of a legal definition of that term that people would draw an inference based on that use that it was necessarily talking about a particular subset of a statute. My understanding is
my time is just about up. That rates 4 Pinocchios. I yield back.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
The gentleman may respond.
Sir, what I would tell you with regards to that decision is that there was concern about the use of the word grossly negligent, and the question of whether or not Director Comey wanted to convey that in the sense of applying the elements of a crime, and that whether or not his use, when people heard that, particularly when lawyers looked at it, whether or not they would interpret that as his saying that she did or did not commit any particular statute. My recollection is that the lawyers, based on that, looking at the use of the word grossly negligent, looking at the way that's been defined, looking at the statute where it occurs, both realized that that was probably not what he wanted to say, and ultimately he made the decision to change that wording and convey what it was he did want to say, and that all of those discussions were generated based on a legal discussion of the use of that term as a legal definition, not as a indicia of violation of any particular statute at all.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, very quickly, I would like to associate myself with the really outstanding opening statements made by Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy, which I think were two of the finest opening statements I've heard in my 30 years in Congress, and express my views completely. Let me also say, while Mr. Strzok will stubbornly not admit what almost everyone else knows is extreme bias, I find it amazing that he can sit here and say that he was not biased in a way that clearly colored and affected his investigations. And if you don't agree with that, I want to read the words from Mr. Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Justice Department, who wrote that the Clinton investigation, quote, was the way it was conducted, quote, was inconsistent with typical investigative strategy and gave rise to accusations of bias and preferential treatment, unquote. Then I would guess that Mr. Strzok knows Chris Swecker, who spent 24 years with the FBI and retired as the head of all the FBI criminal investigations. And Mr. Swecker wrote, he said, the IG report presents jarring evidence of political bias by the FBI against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, but fails to add it all up to come to the inevitable conclusion that political bias was there. This is like saying 1 + 1 = 0. Mr. Strzok, do you have any reason to think that Mr. Horowitz or Mr. Swecker have some sort of bias or animosity toward you?
So I disagree with Mr. Swecker's conclusions. I can't speak to Mr. Swecker's motivations of bias whatsoever, and I know of no bias by the Inspector General.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield my time to my friend and colleague from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
I thank my colleague for yielding. Agent Strzok, on May the 9th, 2017, President Trump fired FBI Director Jim Comey. That same day, you and FBI lawyer Lisa Page exchanged quite a few texts on the topic. At 8:14 p.m. on that day, you texted Ms. Page and said, quote, "And we need to open the case we've been waiting on now while Andy is acting," end quote. First, is that Andy McCabe, the former Deputy Director of the FBI who has since been fired and criminally referred by the Inspector General?
It is.
All right. And what case are you referring to opening now that Andy is the acting director of the FBI?
Sir, to get into that would relate to ongoing investigations, which, consistent with the Department's policy on ongoing investigations and based on the Special Counsel equities, I'm not authorized to discuss ongoing investigations.
Okay, well, let me see if I can give you a question that you can answer. You sent 4 more texts to Ms. Page, and her first response to you at the bottom of that page you're looking at is, quote, "We need to lock in," and then there's a black mark where someone's name's been redacted. "We need to lock in redacted in a formal, chargeable way, period. Soon, period." Whose name's been blacked out?
Sir, I don't know. I need to see the original list or original text.
You don't know? Okay. Well, I don't know either. Here's what else I don't know. I don't know if the person whose name has been redacted is Republican or Democrat. I don't know if they're black or brown or white.
I don't either, sir.
I don't know their religious beliefs. I don't know their sexual orientation. I don't know those things, and I don't care. But here's what I do know. I do know that decisions about when and whether to open investigations and when and whether to charge people with crimes aren't supposed to depend on who's sitting in the director's chair or on political decisions or on the political agendas of FBI agents and lawyers. So if a Trump-hating FBI agent and a Trump-hating FBI lawyer who have talked about effing Trump, stopping Trump, impeaching Trump, are within hours of President Trump firing their boss, if they start talking about opening an investigation now that Andy is acting and that some person needs to be locked in a formal, chargeable way soon, I know, as a former U.S. attorney, that if in fact that's what happened, I know that whoever is the subject of that case that was opened now that Andy is acting, and whoever you and Ms. Page talked about needing to be locked in soon in a formal, chargeable way, well, they would have had their civil liberties violated. They would have been deprived of due process. So my first question to you, you wouldn't answer. My second question to you, you couldn't answer. Let's go for a third question. On page 400 of the Inspector General report, someone tells the Inspector General, quote, there is a bright line, a bright and inviolable line between what you think personally and belief and the conduct of your official business. Who said that?
I believe I did, sir.
You did say that. And I heard you say similar things last week. I heard you say similar things today. You said it very clearly. You said it very unequivocally in your opening remarks that you never crossed that inviolable line in 26 years. Earlier today, in response to a question, you said, I took my personal belief out of every official action. So you're asking us to believe that when you say things like F Trump and stop Trump and impeach Trump, that those are just personal beliefs, and that when you say those things, you never cross that line, that bright, inviolable line, and allow it to impact your official conduct. That's really what this comes down to, that you're asking us to believe, isn't it?
Sir, I'm asking you to believe, and I'm offering you evidence.
Yeah, well, you
whether
have.
It's the IG report, whether
made
it's
it crystal
anything that's
clear.
been found, that there's been no active bias
listen,
found anywhere.
You have, under oath, been as clear as a bell on that. You've said it over and over again. And because of that, I'm almost embarrassed to ask you this question. Of the approximately 50,000 text messages that I've seen with your personal beliefs like F Trump, stop Trump, impeach Trump, go ahead and confirm on the record that none of that occurred on an official FBI device or on official FBI time. Go ahead and do that.
Sir, no, they did. Many of them did occur.
Oh, they did.
And I would say
Okay,
of the
so
50,000, sir.
So really, no, I'll give you a chance at the end. So what you really meant to say was that when you said you never crossed that bright, inviolable line, what you meant to say was, except for 50,000 times, except for hundreds of times a day where I went back and forth, expressing my personal opinions about effing Trump and stopping Trump and impeaching Trump on official FBI phones, on official FBI time. Other than that, you never crossed that line. I'm sure there are 13,000 FBI agents out there that are beaming with pride at how clearly you've drawn that line. Agent Strzok, are you starting to understand why some folks out there don't believe a word you say, and why it's especially troubling that you, of all people, are at the center of the 3 highest profile investigations in recent times that involve President Trump, and that you were in charge of an investigation investigating, gathering evidence against Donald Trump, a subject that you hated, that you wanted to F him, to stop him, to impeach him? And do you see why that might call into question everything you've touched on all of those investigations? Chairman, I'm done with this witness, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond.
Briefly.
Sir, well, there are several questions, and I'll answer them all briefly.
There were several statements. I only heard one question.
Fair enough.
Pointed to your response, however, and in the interest of full transparency, and to Mr. Ratcliffe's point, will you authorize the release of all of the other text messages that have not been released to the Congress to this point?
Sir, I would authorize the release of any work-related text messages that are out there.
But the question is, what's work-related and what is not?
That's right, sir. And I would not accept or agree to the release of non-work-related text messages.
Even though your testimony is that you would never let your work interfere with your personal opinion.
That is exactly my
So
testimony.
how are we going to know that unless we see those text messages?
Well, the Inspector General, very carefully, an independent body, went exhaustively through the entirety of that
Inspector
body
General-
and found, sir, that there were no acts of bias, that there was nothing demonstrable.
Inspector
in
General
any of that
works for
material.
an entirely different entity than the United States Congress. Will you authorize release of them to the United States Congress?
No, sir.
The
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry. I'm trying to understand his answer. My understanding was that the Inspector General did not see what he is claiming to be his personal text, that they were requested and he delivered what he said was business related. So if I understand correctly, no one has seen anything that he determined, Mr. Strzok determined, would not be delivered because in his opinion, they were not business related. I have a number of texts in front of me that I would say were very personal that we're looking at that undoubtedly he would have objected to turning over.
The gentleman makes a very good point. He may want to ask questions about that when he is shortly to be recognized. The gentleman just answered questions regarding the substance of the Trump-Russia collusion investigation. We have many more questions that we are entitled to ask, and the gentleman is responsible for answering with regard to the onset of that investigation. We are not interested in the substance of Mr. Mueller's investigation, but the manner in which it was created and your involvement in that is very much directly related to that. So when we return, we will have more questions for you regarding that, as we indicated earlier. Now the committee will stand in recess for votes, and we will reconvene at 2 p.m. You ready? Yes. Let's get going. The committee will reconvene, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you were part of the Hillary Clinton email investigation, that's correct?
Yes.
And in that investigation, you were part of the decision for her to, and her lawyers to go through emails that were produced during, exclusively used, if you will, during her time as secretary, go through and determine which ones were government and which ones were not, both the classified and unclassified. Is that correct?
I was not.
You were not involved at all?
That's correct.
Okay, but you're aware of it?
I'm aware of their statements to us about how they did it.
And do you think it was okay for Secretary Clinton to determine what could or couldn't qualify for her to turn in under the Federal Records Act?
I can't speak to that. That was a decision, my understanding, between her and her attorneys. And
okay, but you're aware that in her production she failed to deliver some items that have now been ruled as classified, correct?
I'm aware that we recovered information that was not in the material that she turned over. I don't know if it was her failure, the failure of the attorneys conducting that sort, or simply because she didn't have it. I don't know the answer to that question.
So I bring up something that came up in the previous rounds. So far, only you have determined what should be turned over from your private emails that, or your non-government emails and text, what should be delivered because it was government in nature. You've made that decision.
That's right.
And it's your position that nobody else in the way of a government entity should be able to look over your shoulder, so to speak, and make that decision.
That's right.
So you think it's okay for the target, and you are a target, of an investigation to determine what should be delivered rather than, if you will, the government, right?
Sir, I'm not aware of any investigation of which I'm a target.
Well, you're a target of our investigation. We think that you had a bias and you acted on it, and that's been made pretty clear. So I'm going to just ask one series of questions very quickly, if I could. You did a number of texts. All of the texts that are presented to us, as far as I know, came from your government phone, correct?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
So you've made no text available from your private phone, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever text on your private phone?
I did.
Did you ever text Lisa Page on your private phone?
I did.
Did you ever text Lisa Page on your private phone similar text to the ones you did on your government phone?
By similar, you mean what?
Commenting on Mr. Trump or Hillary Clinton or anything else political in nature?
I don't specifically recall, but it's probably a safe assumption that yes,
So
it did.
it's likely that they'd be similar.
It's a safe assumption. I don't.
So your personal phone has likely similar text to the ones that we found on your government phone. That's correct?
I would say it has similar expressions of personal belief. Yes.
Okay, so in front of you have a one sheet of paper that was presented to you a few minutes ago, and I'm going to just go to a date and then ask you to read your own words. March 4th, 2016.
You want me to read this?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. OMG, he's an idiot.
May 4th, 2016.
Now the pressure really starts to finish MYE.
July 19th, 2016.
Hi, how was Trump other than a douche? Melania?
July 21st, 2016.
Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be.
August 6th, 2016.
I don't believe I wrote this text, sir.
Okay, it's been attributed to you, so we'll go on to the next.
Incorrect.
August 8th, 2016.
Again.
And I'll preface it by saying this for context. Ms. Page said, not ever going to become president, right? Right?
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
Repeat that again.
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
August 15th, 2016.
I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40.
On October 20th, 2016.
I can't pull away and I defer to the chairman whether
You
or
can
not
just
he'd
use
like me to
one
use
letter if you
profanity.
don't mind.
What the F happened to our country, Lise?
Okay, read it again that way.
Sir, did you not, was
No,
it
I
not
just wanted to
intelligible?
hear it
You
one
just
more
want to
time.
hear it for
Yeah.
me to repeat it?
Please.
Okay, sir. Sure. Happy to indulge you. I can't pull away. What the F happened to our country, Lise?
Why in the world do you believe that this committee should not ask for the record of similar text from your private account to find out what else you might have said about insurance policies or about the President of the United States or investigation? That is a rhetorical question you need not answer, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I nonetheless answer?
You may respond briefly, even though he said it was a rhetorical question.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Congressman, what I think is critical, and I'm glad you brought up a lot of these because I would like to make the point that I made
I didn't
earlier.
bring them up. I just asked you to read
I
your own
appreciate-
words.
Sir, if I may, what is important is that these texts represent personal beliefs just like those that you'd find on my personal phone. What these texts do not represent is any act, any suggestion of an act, any consideration that we need to do this or not do this. And furthermore, I would encourage you, as I believe I forget who I said this to earlier this morning, you need to read these texts in the context of what was going on at the time. So when I make the comment about Trump having no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be, that came on the heels of a speech where then candidate Trump said he didn't know whether or not the United States should honor its commitment to mutual defense under NATO.
I appreciate
when-
that,
sir,
Mr.
when you
Chairman.
think about that, but-
Thank you very much. That's not briefly, Mr. Chairman. In light
Chairman, may the witness
in
be
light
permitted
of
to
these
finish his
actual,
answer as you
No.
promised you would give him that opportunity?
Every-
Regular order, he
every-
should be permitted to
everyone-
answer his question.
Everyone will suspend. I told the gentleman he could answer briefly. He has answered briefly. And
He has not finished answering.
we will now turn to
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. Agent Strzok, did you provide any information to reporters, journalists, or media personalities about anything related to Trump-Russia investigation in 2016, 17, or 18?
No.
Did the press ever talk to you, Agent Strzok, about this issue? Did they ever come to you?
The Trump-Russia collusion
Did the
investigation?
press ever come to you? I'm asking first, did you talk to them? I'm asking now, did they ever come to you about anything related to Trump-Russia investigation in 2016, 2017, or 2018?
I received a number of calls from various members of the media, particularly when I returned from the Office of Special Counsel. In every instance, I referred.
Prior to going on the special counsel team, did you get any inquiries from the press that you took?
Not that I took. I referred them to the Office of Public Affairs of the FBI.
Have you read the dossier?
I have.
Okay, and you wrote about it too, didn't you?
I don't know what you mean by writing about it.
We got an email that you sent. It should be presented there, or should be in front of you there. I want you to take a look at this. This is an email you wrote to Lisa Page, Bill Priestap, Jim Baker, Jim Rubicki, and CC'd Andy McCabe Subject line is BuzzFeed's about to publish the dossier. You familiar with this email?
I am.
All right. Says this, comparing now, the set is only identical to what McCain had, parentheses, it has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Did you write all that?
Congressman, let me answer it this way. The first, if I could address the chairman. Over the break, I was authorized by the General Counsel.
Hang on a second. I just want my time stopped if you could. Are you addressing me or the chairman?
I'd like to address the
told
chairman
the time
because this is all going to come together in an answer.
Is there a question you want to direct?
No, it's something I wanted to answer your question from earlier based on something I've been told by the FBI.
Wait.
I think I'm aware of what the FBI told you, and you and I will have another chance to talk about that. But right now, the gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
You wrote this. That was the question.
So obviously
Wait,
you have
look at
it.
Do you see the
so,
from?
So Congressman,
you see
here's
the
my,
from line? Do you see the from line?
Congressman, I do.
It says
and I
Peter
understand
Strzok.
this.
And then it says to Lisa Page and a whole bunch of other key people at the FBI. So did you write it?
I did write this.
All right, let me ask you a couple questions about it. It has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Who's Korn?
Sir, to answer that question, and I would love to answer that question, and every part of me, and you know why I'd want to answer that question because you have this information.
Who's Simpson?
I have been, sir, if I may, I cannot answer that question.
You wrote
based
about
on
it. It's now public. Who's Korn? Who's Simpson?
Based on direction by the FBI, sir, I am not able to answer questions about ongoing investigative matters.
I just want to figure this out. I want to figure this out, Agent Strzok. You're referencing 3 copies of the dossier. The BuzzFeed copy you have, the one John McCain's staff gave to you, and the one that you said you got from Korn and Simpson. The one McCain gave to you and the one BuzzFeed has are identical, in your words, but they have the Korn and Simpson one is different.
Sir,
this is kind of important.
It is important, and I want to answer your question. And here's the position that I'm in, Congressman. I have been directed. May I answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted
Mr.
to
Chairman,
answer the question?
Mr. Jordan repeatedly asks a question, doesn't let him answer it.
The gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
I have been directed that I may state that I have read the dossier, that I read the dossier as it came in parts and pieces.
You've already told me you read it.
And
I want to know who Korn and Simpson are.
And, sir, what I'm telling you is that I have been directed I may not state the various places
okay,
where
let me ask
the
you this.
FBI
I got
received
that. I know what you're
information.
saying. I know what you're saying. Did you ever communicate with David Korn?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Glenn Simpson?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Nellie Orr?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Bruce Orr?
Yes.
When did you communicate with Bruce Orr?
My recollection is somewhere between possibly 3 or 4 or 5 times in the late 2016, early 2017 timeframe.
What did you talk about?
We talked about investigative matters that Mr. Orr was involved in.
Did you talk about the investigation we're focused on here, Agent Strzok?
My direction from the FBI is that I may not answer that question, sir.
I got it. Let's go back to the email that you sent that you won't talk about. Are there 3 copies of the dossier as evidenced by what you said in this email?
Sir, to be clear, I want to talk about this email. I want nothing more
than
answer your
all
question
you want, but
because
you're not
it would leave
talking
you
about it. You're
sadly
not answering my
disappointed.
questions. Are there 3 copies?
3 copies of what?
The McCain copy, the BuzzFeed copy, and the one that you got from Korn and Simpson.
Sir, the most I can say is we received a variety of copies of and different types of
Let me ask you one other question.
Let
me ask you one other question. Glenn Simpson testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on August 22nd, 2017. He was asked, did anyone from Fusion ever communicate with the FBI? His response, no. No one from Fusion ever spoke with the FBI. So here's what I'm having trouble understanding. If Glenn Simpson says no one ever spoke with the FBI, how is it that you got a copy of the dossier from Simpson?
Sir, I can tell you I never had contact with Fusion, with Mr. Simpson, with Mr. Korn. And again, sir.
Chairman, regular order.
The gentleman will have a few more seconds since he was interrupted.
Well, I mean, this is the frustration that every single member of this committee feels is when Agent Strzok won't answer, well, more importantly, the American people feel when Agent Strzok won't answer fundamental questions like the guy he references in an email, Corn and Simpson, and won't tell me who they are. This is unbelievable. But that's where it's gotten to now, and it's as frustrating as it can get, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly.
Sir, it is as frustrating to me as it is to you. I can tell you, sir, that I would love.
Well, you know what, Agent Strzok?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted to answer.
If it's so, if
Gentlemen will suspend.
If it's so frustrating, answer the question.
If you'll allow him to, I'm sure he will.
He has never answered the question who
Stop
Corn and Simpson
interrupting
are.
him.
We're about
The
to,
gentleman instruct the gentleman from Ohio to stop badgering and
we're
allow him to answer the question.
We're about to move on. The gentleman from Ohio's time's expired. And we're about to move on where Mr. Strzok can answer a question that he refused to answer earlier on advice of counsel. And I'm going to yield to Mr. Gowdy for the purpose of doing that right now.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Gowdy starts, may I respond to Mr. Jordan?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, sir. I would love to do that. There is an appropriate time for oversight, and as you well know, that is at the end of an investigation once it's concluded. I am certain Congress will absolutely have the opportunity to look at any investigation once it's closed, ask all these questions, and I would love to answer each and every one of your questions
Mr.
once
Strzok,
the FBI allows me and the
we already
investigation
know
is
that
done.
answer from you, and you have already been advised that you can answer the questions here, because guess what? This is the United States Congress where you're testifying, not under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mr. Chairman, we cannot be asking about an ongoing investigation that is sabotaging an ongoing investigation by this committee, and that's what he's not cooperating with, and we should not do it.
It is
and he
not,
cannot cooperating with that.
It is. These questions are table-setting questions regarding the formation of this, and he can answer those questions, but
he cannot answer questions
he's been
regarding an
advised by
ongoing
the FBI
investigation.
that he can, and so Mr.
He's been
Gowdy's
advised by the FBI that he cannot.
No, he's been advised that he can, and Mr. Gowdy's going to again ask his question.
Gentleman from Ohio has asked for 15 seconds.
So, Agent Strzok, who's being square here? Glenn Simpson says no one from Fusion spoke with the FBI. You say in your email, we got a copy of the dossier from Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, regular order.
We will have regular order, and we'll revisit that question. Now the chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Agent Strzok, between July 31st, 2016 and August
Mr. Chairman,
6th.
regular order.
This is regular order. The gentleman refused to answer the question earlier. He has now been advised, and I have been advised by the FBI that he may answer the question that was in order earlier, and he's now going to answer the question.
But, Mr. Chairman, Republicans have controlled the time. Now the time goes to the Democrats.
The gentleman will be recognized shortly.
Agent Strzok, between July 31st, 2016 and August 6th, 2016, how many witness interviews did you conduct as part of the Russia-Trump campaign alleged collusion investigation?
I don't recall, and I'd have to check the case file.
We waited all that time for that answer?
Yes, sir.
That's eerily similar to what you said a couple hours ago.
Sir, I am telling you, and I would reject the characterization that I refuse to answer anything. I want to answer these questions.
Well,
I'm going by the direction that I
one.
received from the FBI.
I just asked you one, and I'm looking for a number.
Sir, and
I'm
answer
looking
is,
for a number.
I do not know without the opportunity to check the case file.
You don't recall in the first week of an investigation that you originated, approved, or the contact person on, you don't recall how many witness interviews you did in the first week?
Sir, I remember that there were interviews conducted. I do not know when they fell on a calendar to be able to tell you whether they were in any set of date or the other on something that was occurring in the context of a myriad other responsibilities.
When's the last time you looked at the file, Agent Strzok?
Probably going on a year.
For those of us who happened to look at it yesterday, would you disagree that the first interview took place on August the 11th?
I don't know, Congressman. I cannot answer that.
Well, prior to July 31st, 2016, how many witness interviews did you conduct as part of the Russia-Trump campaign alleged collusion investigation?
None.
So none before July 31st, which would be none at the time you said what you said in that text on July 21st.
I don't understand the text you're referring
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This is on our time.
Well, no, there are two more questions he didn't.
Right.
He wouldn't answer.
The gentleman will continue.
Between
Can you
May
explain
17th.
why he can continue in our time?
He can he's not on your time.
Not
It's
my
on-
personally
it's on-
Democratic
It's
time.
on our time because he was advised earlier by the FBI that he could not answer the questions, and now he's advised that he can. So the questions will be asked and answered.
Between May 17th.
Parliamentary inquiry. What rules are we following that would dictate such an answer by you, Mr. Chairman?
We are following the rules of the committee.
Could you cite the rule?
No.
No.
Gentlemen will proceed.
Just, Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary
Excuse me,
inquiry.
this seems to be well.
We're going to, the Democrats'
Mr. Chairman, point of
obstruction
parliamentary
this hearing
inquiry.
can continue, but when you do, and the FBI tells him he can't answer a question, and then they change their mind and says he can, we're going to take the time out to do that, and then we're going to continue.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman
Democratic
from South
members
Carolina
have a
is
right to
recognized.
know what the rules are in governing this hearing.
Agent-
Because
Gentlemen,
can you share with us
the
these
gentleman
secret rules
is not
that
in
you're
order.
making up as you go
Gentlemen.
along?
Agent Strzok, between May 17th, 2017 and May 18th, 2017, how many interviews did you conduct as part of the special counsel team?
I don't believe I conducted any.
Between May 17th, 2017 and May 22nd, 2017, how many witness interviews did you conduct in that 5-day period?
Well, so you just went back a year from 2018 to 2017, and I don't know.
2017, May 17th, 2017,
Okay.
May 22nd, 2017.
Yeah, I believe you may have said 18, but 17, I don't know.
Whether I did or not, it's the 17th, 2017.
Fair enough, and I don't recall.
Well, Chairman, I appreciate you letting me make that clear. And again, the context when you would not answer it was you used the word impeachment on May the 18th, 2017, and you used the word impeachment on May the 22nd, 2017. And your testimony is you can't recall a single interview you would have done as part of that investigation that was supposed to lead to impeachment. And I think that line of questioning, I'm glad the FBI finally realized it, albeit a couple hours too late. When you are prejudging not just a result, but a punishment, which is what impeachment is. When you are prejudging the conviction and the sentencing, when you have not conducted a single solitary interview, I'm sorry, Agent Strzok, but that is letting your bias impact your professional judgment.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly.
Sir, so look, I never prejudged anything. Not in this case, not in any others.
Impeachment
Second,
for what,
Mr.
Agent Strzok? Impeachment for what?
Second
After
of
all,
all,
Mr.
Chairman, what are the
Not
rules
letting the
here?
witness
Mr.
answer
Chairman, what are the rules?
The gentleman will
He's
allow
opened
the
up a whole
witness
new
to
round of
answer the
questions.
question, and then we'll move on.
Second,
He was given time to
Second,
respond, and
the
now
notion, at the time I was the deputy assistant director, I have section chiefs, unit chiefs in the field, supervisors, agents, people who typically do interviews, not me. If something is notable or high level, I might be involved, but it would be rare, if never, that I would typically get out there and conduct interviews, first of all. Second, you mentioned the use of the word impeachment. That was used in the context of my not knowing what this would lead to. I was not prejudging impeachment. When I used that term, it was saying
Agent
it might
Strzok,
do nothing.
please.
It might lead all the way
Thank
to something on the
Thank
other.
you, Agent Strzok.
Agent
The
Strzok,
chair
are you
now
kidding?
recognizes the